Hello and welcome to the first This Week in Anthem of 2019. I hope everyone had a great holiday and new year. We're now only weeks away from the release of Anthem. There's been a huge amount of activity on Twitter in the past few weeks, especially from Ben Irving, who's starting to challenge Mark Dara for the Ask Me Anything About Anthem crown. The year of Anthem has only just begun and we've already got a lot to catch up on. Though we don't currently have any developer live streams planned, at least before the rapidly approaching VIP demo on the 25th, so we shouldn't be getting any major info drops until then. But the Ask Me Almost Anything About Anthem is back with a vengeance, with Ben Irving answering well over 100 questions on Twitter over the holiday period. A lot of these were repeated questions, of course, but that's still a lot of work to put in on Ben's part, and didn't go by without some fresh answers. So how I'm going to structure this first week of responses is by pulling out some of the more significant answers that require a little extra context, and then I'm going to rapid fire my way through any extra questions at the end. And I'll probably continue this format going forward if it's needed. As always, if you want to follow up on any of these, I'll link all of the source tweets in the description below, so let's jump back into everything of week 1 of 2019. We may not have had any official live streams from the dev this week, but what we did get was a full playthrough of the Lost Arcanist mission from the alpha build over on IGN, showing off 3 javelins, the Colossus, an Interceptor, and a Storm, as they progress through one of the earliest missions in the game. So if you want to see how it plays outside of the hands of developers, this is a great watch. Or if you can't get enough of one of those javelins, they each get a fair bit of screen time. However, most importantly, from my perspective as a lore nerd at least, is the amount of subtle information we get to learn about the world, from the interactions between Faye and Owen, the exploration, and the most obvious, the mission itself, as this is the first real look at Matthias and his storyline. He'll be one of our main contacts in the game, sending us on our missions for the Arcanist faction. This just happens to be how we meet him. We get to see some little bits of his personality as he courageously, or stupidly depending on how you look at things, searches for clues about relics and artifacts from local regions around Fort Tarsus, taking us to an ancient temple built on the side of a mountain, under constant assault by the Scar, as they dig through the earth itself to stop him finding what he's looking for, or from stopping us finding Matthias. I'll make sure to do a full breakdown of this as there's just too much to unpack. But for now, onwards to the avalanche of answered questions from the last 2 weeks. Just as I thought I'd finished this script, Nvidia went and dropped an all-new Anthem trailer in the middle of the night. It might be short, but this technical look at Anthem from John really shows how gorgeous Anthem can be. For those of you who are concerned that to start with we only have one major biome in the jungle, this might put you at ease. So I could go on about all the technical marvels and the fine details, but what has me interested is 2 all-new enemies. The first is this awesome quadrupedal robot, who I think belongs to the Scar, especially with that scrap ruined style of both it and the surroundings. Way deadlier than anything else we've seen from them so far. So this could be a mini-boss from them, and if they have access to this kind of tech, imagine what else they could be hiding from us. The other creature looks like it's from the wild, yet has been modified with shaper weapons. Part of me thinks this is actually related to the Dominion and the core story. We've already seen the Monitor take control of the Anthem of Creation, at least for a while, in addition to tech that allows them to dominate the creatures of Anthem itself. Either way, I'm excited to see what else they've got in store, as the enemy variety is starting to shape up better than I'd originally thought, even without access to the demo. Now finally onto the Q&A. To make these answers a little easier to follow and hopefully be able to use them in a more constructive fashion, I've broken them into groups, covering loot, demo details, mechanics, and endgame. If needed, I'll also do a rapid fire set of questions at the end if they really don't warrant much context or commonly asked simple questions, beginning with everything loot related. The first of which is pretty important when considering how the endgame is going to shape up, as it relates to how many items there are to grind for at the very max level. So are there multiple legendary items for each ability type? Not at launch. This only applies to abilities, I should stress, so each option will have a legendary version. When it comes to weapons and components, however, the restrictions won't be so tight, due to them being more universal, which, as the following tweet confirms, means we should be seeing approximately 100 legendary items in total. Not too bad considering this is split across 4 javelins, though I can imagine it won't take long for these to run dry, especially if you're focused on one javelin, as there will likely be a couple of build types to try. The real test will be how long it takes to achieve them, and how much enjoyment and incentive people have to push past to find better rolls and equipment for other javelins. Speaking of which, there is a mechanic in some games for you to lock items, which prevents you from accidentally deleting or scrapping them. Particularly useful if you're scrapping large numbers of items. Anthem, at least for the time being, won't have this feature. It would be a nice quality of life change, but without seeing how the crafting system actually works, it's hard to determine how much impact this kind of system would have. That's all on the topic of loot this week, so I'm going to move on to the demo. For some reason there have been a huge number of questions on this topic, many of which can be answered by this graphic. So I'll leave this up here while I cover off some of the basics. There are two separate demos, one for VIPs, which just means that you have pre-ordered the game. The second is an open demo that anyone can play. Both of these demos will cover the same content, have access to all 4 javelins, and none of the progress you make in either demo will carry over, both from the VIP demo into the open demo. In addition, items you would collect as rewards from the Legion of Dawn edition will not be in either demo, though you will have access to the forge and customization within it. With that out of the way, there are still a few clarifications that have been made that you might find useful, or at least a little interesting. For playing the VIP demo, you do get a reward. This is not a weapon or anything game changing, but you do receive a decal that you'll be able to receive in the full version of the game. Secondly, neither demo will be under NDA, so that means if you want, you can stream, record, screenshot, and generally talk about any of the content you play through. If you did play in the alpha, that content is and will always be under NDA, so try to avoid making any comparisons to it, as technically this is a breach of your NDA and could result in issues for yourself. If you are planning on playing in both the demos, there were some interesting questions about the client. Such as, is it going to be the same one for starters? Yes, it will. So can we use the same client for both? Fortunately, yes, although they've hinted that there may be some differences between the two, but no patch should be required from one to the other. From the demo, we're moving on to the mechanical clarifications. This is probably where the majority of the questions in general come from, at least until people try the game for themselves. The first set of questions we've got is related to disconnecting, rejoining, and experience as a result of these. When a player drops from the group due to a disconnection, are they able to rejoin? Yes. Anthem currently does have a reconnection feature in place, which as of now is set to 2 minutes. After this, the slot will open up for backfill from the matchmaking system, so if you can't make it back in time, what happens to everything you've accomplished up to that point? Well, as you won't have been to the exit reward screen, those items are held until you next go through one. The XP and items collected previously are then added to that screen. This is also repeatable, so if you disconnect on 2 or more missions in a row, they will keep stacking until you finally complete a mission. The end mission interface brings us nicely onto the user interface in general. You'll have noticed one thing missing from the UI are about stats of your teammates. In the current builds, there will be no health bars for anyone other than yourself. This also extends to having no UI for XP, or being able to see what loot you have acquired until the final screen of the mission. This is an attempt to declutter the UI and let the gameplay take priority. However, I do understand the loot and XP side more so than having information about your team. Yes, using VoIP does help, and you can see when members get downed. But if you've ever done raid tier content or just high-end difficulty content before, you'll know how crucial knowing the status of your team at a glance is. I hope this is something they'll revisit after launch, even if just having it as an option would really help with the quality of life changes. While technically not related to the UI, there was a question asked about clans and guilds, and whether the alliance system that's in place is equivalent or not. The answer is yes, and just like guilds in MMOs, you can increase your XP and, by the sounds of it, progress the alliance to gain additional benefits. This could be just a higher XP generation, but if they have fleshed out a full guild system, we could see some very nice bonuses come from these, and actual incentives to play with our friends within that same guild. Otherwise, people will be dissuaded from playing with those outside of their alliance, and being able to generate a significantly larger amount of loot just by being part of an alliance could cause havoc with endgame progression, especially when leaderboards are concerned. The last note in regards to the UI is in relation to being able to view teammates, or specifically their equipment, which means you'll not be able to see what kind of build they're running, leaving with the only option to use VoIP to know what equipment they've taken, which could be critical to how you approach a mission. I'm sure most of the times it won't be an issue, but if you're unable to use VoIP for whatever reason, then working with others is going to be much harder, as even the PC version isn't going to have in-game chat due to legal reasons from having issues in the background of the industry. So with the UI out of the way, we can move on to being on the missions themselves. The first question we've got is related to the difficulties and when you can progress through them. Ben confirmed that you can go up to a hard difficulty right from the start of the game, though you might not want to due to the grind it will become without sufficient gear. So once you're in a mission, what mechanic does Anthem have in place to prevent people from running off from the objective, or falling behind as the team regresses without them? Well, they've designed the mission pacing to resolve this. What I think they mean by this is how they approach the objectives and checkpoints within them. Each objective will create a mission area, and if you wander too far from it, I suspect you'll get a message telling you to turn back. Much like if you walk too far off a map edge in other games. In the most recent IGN footage, we can see some of these objectives kick in when they progress through the story, but no one died or went too far back from the group, so we didn't get to see any of the solutions in practice. On the topic of difficulty, we had a clarification that I'm almost certain I've seen before, but it's not commonly known. Does content scale to match you? Yes it does, but only in regards to your pilot level, which currently caps out at 30. However, it is your gear that will allow you to eventually outstrip some of the difficulties. They've done this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it means they can make all content have longevity, from launch to any other areas, missions, strongholds, and raids. It also helps in terms of playing with others, as it keeps the enemies more balanced, but as long as your overall gear is higher, you will still have the advantage, without becoming a completely one-sided stomp, until you've decked out in the best gear at least. On top of this generalised idea, we got some actual numbers on how it's scaled. The enemy amounts will increase at 2 and 4 players, with health and damage scaling at each player added to the group. Not too sure what the percentage increases are on these, but interesting to know if you don't plan on playing with 4 players all the time. I've also got 2 answers that toe a line between being in the loot category and mechanical depending on how you view them. So with items, as they get into the higher levels, you start to unlock inscription on items, ending up with 4 on each gear slot, along with 2 on each of your 6 components that can be equipped. These inscriptions do not override each other, and in fact, they actually stack, which means a lot of the endgame will be related to working out the most efficient abilities and stacking as much damage, cooldown reduction, and whatever else is needed to make them function. Also means in theory you could reduce something like a cooldown timer to effectively 0 for 1 or more gear slots. The other half of the stacking idea I wanted to cover is for the elemental and combo system. So we all know some of the attacks are elemental, and that once under a status effect, you can trigger them to cause a combo. It turns out you can actually stack multiple of these effects at once. Unfortunately they won't all individually combo, but whatever the last elemental effect applied will be triggered. This supposedly applies to literally everything, including javelin abilities. So you can stack damage debuffs, buffs, and any other support effects from the same javelin. In addition to this, the devs went on to clarify what each of the elements do as their initial status effect. Fire creates a damage over time effect, Frost freezes the target in place, Acid creates a damage taken debuff, and Lightning creates an AoE damage aura. And finally, we've got questions in relation to the endgame. Still one of the more mysterious topics when it comes to Anthem. The first I would hope is pretty well known, but I do see it asked a lot. Will Anthem have content updates such as DLC, and will the base game have access to them? So the answer here is yes, regular content will be free. Which is great, and stops the community being split up. Though I am a little skeptical of the wording, because what does regular content actually mean? I can only speculate from my experience with other games in the live service genre, so if we take a game like Battlefield 5, which is under the same model for the same reason, we could see themed content, related to progressing stories, that add new contracts, maps, stronghold, raids, loots, cosmetics, and possibly even new javelins. What isn't clear is what sits outside of this regular update tag. You could argue that javelins aren't regular content, so they may come with a price tag, or that a major update might be created once a year for a dramatic shift in the story, much like Diablo classically added an additional story chapter to the game, but left the rest completely playable. I have no guarantees for what this means, but what's certain is that a free story and loot content is implied at a minimum. Aside from these updates, we've had many questions related to how the endgame works. Will Anthem have daily or weekly challenges to receive high-end gear? Simply yes. Though some of the other questions expand onto this. You may have heard the term legendary contracts in terms of the endgame. Well, legendary contracts are repeatable, dynamic, in-game content which takes you out into the world to satisfy objectives, which to me sounds a lot like bounties in Diablo 3, but with Anthem's twist. Mike and others have even mentioned that they are, I quote, hella hard. But what other difficult content can we expect to see in the endgame? It seems the most difficult will be these contracts, along with strongholds, but repeating any of the other missions on Grandmaster 3 will be a significant challenge. The last set of questions I've got for you today are specific to the length of Anthem as a story, or critical path as it's known. So far there has been no straight answer to this, because the completion time is varied. I would assume they have a rough idea of general playthrough, even if it's purely off the back of alpha testers and personal experience. I can imagine it's not something they want to say up front due to the nature of the game. It's unlikely to be nearly as long as their other titles, but that's a rough bar to even attempt. One feature I'm a little surprised to see isn't in Anthem is the ability to replay cutscenes you've been through. I guess it's not that common, but my experience with Blizzard titles made me assume it would be there. The only way to replay them is to create an all-new freelancer and play the whole story again. And finally, the last question. Technically isn't related to future content, but doesn't really fit anywhere else. On top of coming out as I'm writing this. When do the javelins unlock? They recently confirmed that specific javelins aren't tied to levels anymore, and that you can choose the unlock path. This apparently applies for all of them straight after the tutorial. You'll get to pick any javelin you want, using the following level unlocks: 2, 8, 16, and 24. That brings us to the end of this very first This Week in Anthem of 2019. This was a really long episode, so I apologise for the length, and my thanks goes to anyone who stayed with it right until the end. As always, I want to hear your thoughts on anything Anthem, and you can find links to everything I've covered in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like. You can subscribe to support the channel and use the bell to be notified of future content as it goes live. Until next time, I've been Dante, thanks for watching.